I'm Andy Schmuckler. I'm going to use this as an occasion to try to think myself through something I intuitively am just started to feel, which is that we need to be talking to the American people in certain ways about the crisis we have in the American judiciary right now. The judiciary is not looking too good, and it's looking bad in ways that are not just a matter of quality. It's a matter of the wrong forces taking over. So let's uh, ask ourselves, what are we going to do about it? I realize that we're in a bigger war of democracy against fascism is the sort of the major categories we got going on here. But one of the major battlefields we can now see clearly is the judiciary. Um, we It should not have been so difficult for the crimes of Donald Trump for him to be held to account. Uh, Everywhere you looked, there was something falling down on the job or actively aiding the criminal. And it should not be possible for someone like that's done what Donald Trump has done to use the appeals process, for example, the way he's succeeded in doing. It should not be possible for the most serious crimes in American history not to be brought to trial because he's got right to bring all kinds of stupid, worthless appeals that delay the thing. You got to have file the papers and you got to argue the thing, and time goes by and tick, 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 tick. Every time he invents some bogus way of appealing things, he gets to buy some time. Well, I don't know if anybody's ever played that game that way. I've never. I'm not aware of it, but he's shown a vulnerability in the system. We should be at least asking ourselves, what can be done to prevent anything like that from ever happening again? And I gather that Adam Schiff has got some kind of a bill on the House floor that give more would help protect against this sort of thing. But I don't know any of the details of it. But that's what we have a situation now where there are defects that can be shown in how the Supreme Court is functioning that shouldn't be there. There's a lack of integrity, and it actually can be shown. And the Senator Whitehead of Rhode Island is the guy who knows this inside and out. There is a plutocratic or fascistic force that has worked consistently, systematically, to create a court that will basically hand down decisions that are to their liking. And it's come out even now, which I think can be exposed more, that they've actually developed a kind of a technology of like generating an opinion to get the result you want, and pretending that it's got to do with history and tradition. It's actually a kind of a search engine which finds old language that says what you once said, even if most of the history is really in a completely different direction. And that this has actually been practiced in some right-wing Supreme Court decisions, like on gun rights. I guess Justice Thomas wrote this opinion that that's basically generated by a kind of AI that gives a phony gloss to a decision that was made for entirely partisan purposes. And we can see in a whole lot of ways that this Supreme Court has become something very different from what its role is supposed to be in. And so part of the deal is to help Americans understand the role that the Supreme Court is supposed to play, and then contrast it with, I would say that if I were to run an advertising campaign, my first choice would be to show that what the Supreme Court did to abet Trump in his desire to escape accountability by delaying completely unnecessarily the dismissal of a stupid presidential immunity appeal that could have been thrown out in December, but giving him till maybe even June before anybody would be allowed to proceed with a trial, that this represents what I would stress in the advertisements as this Supreme Court blatantly sided with the criminal against the rule of law. I don't know how complex you can make a message to get through to the American people, but I sure would like to see that part of this upcoming campaign is to flesh out the ways in which this is between democracy and fascism. You know, to give Trump an extra 4+ months of delay so that he doesn't have to and frustrate the enormous public interest in having that trial conducted as soon as possible, so that the American people who have to make a big decision about this guy will have the benefit of a vital piece of information. Did this guy attempt a coup d'etat? Was he a one-man crime wave? Did he attempt to overthrow a legitimate election? Was he guilty of a big lie in an attempted coup d'etat? Did he incite an insurrection? They're entitled to know these things. The rule of law says that a stupid appeal cannot be allowed to slow things down when there's so much at stake for the nation. Like the Supreme Court found when Nixon's tapes were on the line, this one did just the opposite. It refused to take the case as it should have back when Jack Smith first wanted to give it, like the court did with the Nixon tapes. And then it just has slow walked everything ever since. They have sided with the criminal against the rule of law. And then, as people think about, however you structure an ad that will stimulate them to think about, what does it mean when that the Supreme Court sided with Trump in that case? Didn't side with anything like he had claimed anything of any validity. They just handed him months worth of delay, which is what Trump, everybody in the observing the thing can see that Trump's continual effort is to get more and more delay. And the Supreme Court gave him a big Christmas present, all wrapped up in a bow. I mean, he didn't just get a few weeks of delay. He got 4 to 6 months of delay. What does it mean if the Supreme Court, in a case of this magnitude, against a guy who violated his oath of office to protect the Constitution, what does it mean that they would give him delay he was not entitled to, but seems quite clearly just designed to give him more time so that he doesn't have to face the consequences of what would be shown in a trial before people get a chance to vote? Because polls show that there are a lot of people who, if these trials were to take place and Trump were to be found guilty of all the things he'd been charged with that had been brought to life with a national audience, there are a lot of people who would not feel okay about voting for the guy who had done who a jury had found unanimously had committed all these crimes. I mean, there's a part of me which says to those people, don't we already know beyond a reasonable doubt that he did all this stuff? But I do think it's good to have it dramatized for people. What does it mean that the Supreme Court has regarded that dramatization as a threat rather than a means of advancing the rule of law that's supposed to be their responsibility? The rule of law says that the guy who did what Trump did, like about the insurrection, the coup d'etat or whatever, he's really got to be held accountable. And the guy who behaved that way with the documents, I mean, we've heard on TV the people who have had that kind of document that they've been entrusted to, the huge deal that the national security apparatus makes about how those such documents are to be handled. I mean, they just sort of shudder. It's such a violation what Trump did for whatever reason, which is still somewhat mysterious about what. I mean, here's a guy who doesn't read documents apparently. Was he in it for the money? But who knows? But in any event, his conduct was just screaming for. I mean, he defied subpoenas. He was defying the rule of law to come after him, and even Merrick Garland saw no way apart from except to bring in a Jack Smith. But then we see in the American judicial system all this delay, the Supreme Court doing what it did with the delay. Judge Cannon down in Florida getting the case assigned to her and then dealing like she's a paid agent of the defendant. And a whole variety of other things that are alarming about the state of justice in America today. The fact that the Supreme Court sided with the criminal against the rule of law with the Trump appeal, that goes all together with a whole lot of other decisions that they've made, that they've consistently given bogus reasons to justify getting outcomes that you would expect them to want if they were going to act as partisans of the political force that put them on the bench, which is a plutocratic, so essentially kind of fascistic force. The plutocratic meaning money's got a whole lot to do with it. Economic power buying political power. But fascistic in that there are alliances between all that big money and certain other aspects of the political culture that are not just greedy, but are cruel and conflict-oriented and things that you associate with fascism. That's what runs the right now. And I have a video in which I explain that I think that brokenness took over the Republican Party to such an extraordinary extent because of a kind of a quirk of history that the two most powerful forces of brokenness in America up till the 1960s, that used to cancel each other out by being one in the one party and one in the other party, got housed under one party. And I'm talking about the white supremacy force that used to live in the Democratic Party that migrated over to the Republican Party, which had always been the home of corporate greed. America's two strongest forces of brokenness, corporate greed and white racism, under one tent, no longer canceling each other out, but multiplying it themselves to the point where they could take over a once respectable political party. And the force behind it being sufficiently strong that it enabled a plutocratic force to basically take over more and more of the country. So when the Republican Party has a few minutes where it controls all the levers necessary back in 2017, the only thing they've got to do, aside from taking health care insurance away from millions of their own supporters, the only thing they've got to do is to pass a tax cut that transfers $2 trillion from those who have less and from future generations to the people who already have the most. That's the plutocracy at work. And the plutocracy has been working to give us a court that has come under the control of one of the partisan interests to such an extent that on a wide range of issues, one can find them coming down on a side that should be weaker. But what's consistent is not the rule of law, but the interests of the force that put him on the bench, which coincided with Donald Trump, I would say, at that moment. And I've wondered a little bit about that. Well, the court is not pro-Trump, I don't think. They're pro the force that put them there. And that force is, I think, ambivalent about Trump. But at this point, Trump is going to be the Republican nominee. So the force that put these guys on the Supreme Court bench said, we're better protected to help Trump get the presidency again. The guy who gave us the $2 trillion before, and he'll play ball. We'll stay out of each other's way. That instead of I wish I had somebody here to remind me where I was going. You can find them, the Supreme Court, acting as partisans again and again and in different ways. Some having to do with the shadow docket and what they did with the Texas abortion law. It's just been a scandal and a stench, to use Sotomayor's, I think it's the word about this court. There's a lot that's wrong with it. And I don't think that it should be ignored. I think it helps to give people a more multidimensional notion of what's at stake in the political battle of this moment. We can focus appropriately on Trump versus Biden, but it's bigger than that. It's when you've got a Supreme Court that's not into actually enforcing the law on conflicting parties as a way of finding out how conflicts should be resolved, but instead is essentially in the pay or obligated to, or at least deeply aligned with a political force that again and again is seeking to extend its power through cases that come before the court. So, like in Citizens United, if you're the plutocracy, you really want Citizens United to be decided that way. You want the court to dishonestly assume that this is not going to lead to money buying political power, which is the essence of corruption. This is a court that has contorted itself in legal terms. And I can envision that someone more knowledgeable than me and with a larger platform than mine could begin delivering a certain series of dramatic messages to the country. The first one might be this: what does it say when that this Supreme Court would side with the criminal against the rule of law? You know, maybe that would be a theme of the introductory speech, and maybe to have at least to sound the alarm, because the country, I don't think, has any real awareness of our having a crisis about our judicial system that has been exposed in recent times, both in terms of how it can be exploited to delay justice that should. What would have to change so that Trump wouldn't have been able to play out the clock so much? Really? Is there some way one could legislate a practice so that nothing like that could happen? Well, that might be the Adam Schiff thing that I don't know what it is. And then there's the question of what do we do with that we have a Supreme Court majority? And I think that the evidence of what they did with the Trump appeal of the stupid immunity clause, at least 5 justices are sided with the criminal against the rule of law. And what do we do about that fact? These are not people we want to be playing the role that the Supreme Court's supposed to be playing. And we got the whole corruption thing, the junkets that Thomas and I guess Alito also to some extent. There's a lack of self-regulation. There's a real problem with the court. The esteem of the court in recent years has fallen, I think, dramatically. And this speaker that I'm imagining, one measure of his or her success, or maybe it would be several speakers. I'm thinking of a senator that's eloquent, and legally she used to be with the Harvard Law School. And I can think of a congressman who used to be a professor of constitutional law in a respectable university program, and has shown himself to be. Both of them are very fine, compelling speakers, and I can imagine them getting up and getting the proportion of people who perceive that there's a problem here, and maybe that perceive that this lawlessness is tied directly into Trump and the Trump party. So it's not apart from the electoral politics. It's the fact that Trump got this from the Supreme Court is damning for Trump too, because Trump's desire for delay amounts to a virtual confession. And so one of the things that Americans can be educated in is all this effort that Trump has to avoid having the facts laid out in court is a virtual confession. If you were innocent of these charges, wouldn't you want to prove it in court? There's a lot that can be done. And the connection between the Supreme Court, Judge Cannon, a lot of other stuff going on in terms of having a healthy rule of law. And some proposals. This is what we might do about it. Once the alarm has been raised, then to present a vision of how we move forward from here. And I wish I could say, okay, well, I can tell you what that vision would be. I mean, some people have talked about putting more people on the court. Some people have talked about age limits. I don't think we're going to be able to impeach anybody. Well, maybe you could impeach Justice Thomas, and I don't know if there's a legitimate way of creating vacancies. But it's not okay to have an extension of the force of fascism getting the last word on every matter of conflict that has to do with, as all of our conflicts basically end up doing, the rule of law. Yeah, you're going to let this force of fascism, the one that's willing to lie, that puts out phony opinions, that takes an oath to enforce the Constitution, and then prostitutes the Constitution with this technique of generating phony opinions. Well, there's something to present here. Well, maybe we're up to 8 different little lectures or press conferences that these people, this senator and this congressman, deliver to the country. But one of the things that Donald Trump represents is lawlessness. That's why he's been indicted all these times. But another thing he represents is a corruption of the system that's supposed to make sure that we operate by the rule of law. I think it would be a good twofer in terms of the ongoing election. There can be other people who will stress other aspects of the ugliness that Trump and the Trump party represents. And there's no shortage of places to look and sum it up. And then there's the House minority, which has been very generous in serving up images of ugliness. There's a lot that can be done, but this is one in particular that I think might be worth looking into developing. Well, feels like a good enough avenue to say I got myself reasonably persuaded that it can be done and that it should be done. But I think I'll pass these ideas along and see if they ring true to anybody who might actually put them to use. So we'll see.